In 1972, George Lucas is working on a movie script. This movie is an epic and spectacular journey that will leave a mark in the history of cinema. This movie is Apocalypse Now. Yup, Coppola's classic was to be directed by Lucas, but studios eventually refused to fund it because of the pessimistic atmosphere around the Vietnam War. He thus transferred to Star Wars the idea of an asymmetric conflict between a powerful and modern military force against an ill-equipped but determined resistance. The first metaphor of this opposition is the battle between the Empire and the Rebellion. The imbalance of resources is obvious, conveyed through the scale difference of the rebel ship literally swallowed by a gigantic Imperial destroyer. The power imbalance forces the rebels to have a different tactic and do more with less, such as during the Hoth battle, in which the Empire's superiority is glaring. The snowspeeders are similar to flies against the walkers. As Luke says during the battle,
"That armor's too strong for blasters!"
They won't succeed by overtopping the Empire with technological means, but through smart moves and ingenuity. Likewise, they're moderate and count their strikes to be efficient, firing with the ion cannon at the right moment to protect the transports. On the contrary, the Empire relies too much on technology and sins out of pride, as they leave hyperspace too late, and the firepower way superior to the rebels won't be enough to beat them. This imbalance is shown once again during the attack of the Death Star, when a few single-seater spaceships attack the huge space station. During the battle, the imagery also serves this idea of a cold and dehumanized Empire with full black outfit worn by the silent pilots. They stand in strong contrast to the rebel squadrons, whose names we know. The rebels are indeed the champions of diversity. Their troops include colored people, as well as various aliens, and women hold positions of command. On the contrary, the Empire full of white men is reluctant to deal with eclectic bounty hunters.
Bounty hunters? We don't need that scum.
Who'll eventually succeed where the officers have failed in finding the rebels. Even the spaceships convey diversity. The Empire has identical spaceships expressing an inline production process, while the rebel fleet is varied, with more colorful ships and organic shapes. Look at the rebel transport, or the Mon Cal cruiser for example. And Leia's last name, which is Organa, adds to this characteristic of the Alliance. On the other hand, Imperial destroyers have stark silhouettes, very geometrical. Lastly, it's worth mentioning the interesting relationship that rebels have with nature. On Hoth, they take advantage of the environment riding Tauntauns that contrast with the mechanical AT-STs. And this dichotomy between nature and technology goes on throughout the saga, such as during the chase in Episode 3, between Grievous and his wheel cycle and Obi-Wan's Boga. But for the rebels, they hide in the shelter provided by nature in icy caves. And the idea of fusion with the environment is evoked through the colors of the communication tools. White on Hoth, while they were green on the jungle planet of Yavin. Those camps are also marked by spirituality that characterizes the rebels and the good guys overall, as we'll discuss later on. Indeed, they lurk in an ancient temple on Yavin, and then in the frozen caverns of Hoth that were designed as religious places during pre-production. And for Episode 6, they take shelter with the Ewoks, who cultivate a strong connection to spirituality, with shamans at the head of the tribes. Alright, Ewoks. First thing we should mention about them is that they were part of Lucas's plans for a long time. Actually, the idea of a primitive people standing up against the Empire was mentioned in the very early script's draft, but was initially supposed to be the Wookiees. Even for Empire Strikes Back, the early drafts had a primitive noble race, flying Aiwas, which would eventually be attributed to Kaminoans. But by Episode 6, Wookiees were already part of Star Wars universe, and Chewie, an experienced co-pilot, prevented Lucas from passing them off to people unaware of technology. To serve his idea of weak fighting the mighty, Lucas came up with the Ewoks. So blaming the Ewoks to be only teddy bears destined to be toys is missing one of the main themes of the saga that Lucas cherished. Indeed, Episode 6 is the most obvious metaphor of Vietnam. In the woods, the local underdogs are using guerrilla tactics to push back a better equipped enemy. Thanks to their local knowledge, they lay traps to the Imperials, who are not expecting such a fierce resistance. Those teddy bears might look a bit corny, but what's important here is the lesson they carry. The will of a people, even unarmed, can overcome oppression.
This film was written during the Vietnam War, where a small group of ill-equipped people were able to overcome a mighty power. It's not a new idea. The American colonies were able to overrun the British. The Roman Empire had huge mechanical advantage and training advantage over the Huns. But the Huns were still able to overwhelm them with sort of enthusiasm and their humanness and their belief in what they were doing. And that was the main theme for the overall downfall of the empire, when it was basically overcome by humanity. in the form of cute little teddy bears.
Those historical examples inspired many artistic representations, with the best one probably being the Lord of the Rings. Just like Palpatine, Sauron, Dark Lord, with armies at his command, couldn't see that his defeat would come from the most innocent people. And Tolkien's masterpiece also opposes the one respecting nature against the ones exploiting it. It is a common theme of many science fiction movies which tackle the role of ecology. For Star Wars, the role is carried by the Ewoks, living in the trees in communion with the forest. And I can't help giving you this little bonus cute fact, even if it doesn't stem from the movies. A tree is planted at the birth of each Ewok, who has the responsibility to take care of it. If he handled it well, the tree dies soon after the Ewok, and then the wood is chopped and used for the tribe. That opposition between nature and technology even went way further in the early drafts of Episode 6. The rebels who were supposed to attack the Empire's home planet had Abaddon, whose name means hell in Hebrew and symbolizes the downfall of a technological world. In the end, the action was moved to the Death Star, but this idea of nature versus technology is still there. The 3D image of the briefing shows the station kinda extracting what it can from nature, but they won't be able to escape its doom. You can't use nature forever. And this is also evoked in the unnatural juxtaposition between the Endor forests and the bunker and Imperial antenna that stand out in this environment. And if you think I'm overinterpreting, just look at the prequels. The Gungan people is actually Lucas checking if we got the lesson. A hidden people, primitive at first sight, proves decisive in ensuring victory for our heroes. They are opposed to their oppressor, the entirely mechanical droid army destroying their environment from a philosophical point of view. There are people with sacred places who respect nature by living in symbiosis with it. Even the technology respects nature by using bioinspiration for the Bungo submarine, which during its development looked even more like an octopus.
Gungans have a very organic technology, which has to do with some kind of plasma and kinds of things they find at the bottom of the lakes. I call it electric eel technology. And then you have the droids, which are very mechanical and everything is very technologically oriented. So it's really a battle between biology and physics.
This mutual advantage bond is pushed forward with the Naboo. They're better when they cooperate with the Gungans. Like a friend of mine said,
"You and the Naboo form a symbiont circle. What happens to one of you will affect the other. You must understand this."
Naboos do have a strong connection to nature as well, in their architecture carefully planned since pre-production.
So it was really blending art with nature. One of the real challenges for Naboo was, okay, how do you blend those two to in many ways complement the natural surroundings of their planet? So every little piece, every little detail in terms of the door frames, the doorknobs, everything was treated with the care of an artist. And that kind of gave it the perfect blend where you actually saw beautiful trees and this technology that actually became art. And so it was really
And just to make sure, Lucas gives us another example of an asymmetrical warfare during Episode 3 and the droid attack on the Wookiees. The opportunity for him to come full circle with the first scripts written 30 years earlier. Wookiees are connected with nature. They live in communion with the worship trees and get around on animals or biomimetic machines. Plus, it is the knowledge of the terrain that allows Yoda to escape right after Order 66. Only respectful people such as the Wookiee manage to merge technology with nature in harmony. One example of this is a very precise modification of the moth on the roof of this Wookiee building to accentuate its fusion with the environment. George Lucas' willingness to showcase a connection between nature and human construction really seems to be important for him. Maybe it's not a coincidence then if his very last and perhaps biggest project, his museum, has such an organic look.
It's going to be organic architecture. Connects to the ground, it looks like it's a living thing. It's not a square box, conforms to the land in a kind of way, feels like an organic thing.
We've started to discuss it, the saga not only opposes technology to nature, but also to spirituality, the belief in something bigger than technique. This notion is at the heart of Luke's trajectory. When assaulting the symbol of technology, the Death Star, he's firstly left alone when R2, his astromech droid, is hit. He then chooses to rely on Force rather than his targeting computer. This leap of faith evokes his progression since the beginning of the movie with this symbolic scene in which he uses high-tech microbinoculars that deceive him as he can see the threat right under his eyes. Another case in point is this scene that takes place in the Millennium Falcon. Han, kinda his antithesis, is a technology enthusiast. He shoots at everything and is extremely attached to his ship. He rejects the possibility that Luke could have resisted a training remote using the Force.
Look, good against remotes is one thing. Good against the living, it's something else.
And he says so precisely when droids, machines, or beating a living being at hollow chess. That's enough to raise questions about the future superiority of the machine over man. The movie also evokes an ambiguous relation with technology from the Jedi. At first sight, it seems like the lightsaber is opposed to the Jedi philosophy. How could such a technological weapon be the Order's symbol? Ben Kenobi gives us the answer.
An elegant weapon for a more civilized age.
In a world in which everyone is carrying blasters, a hand-to-hand weapon is probably far less futuristic. If we dig further, the lightsaber's inspiration stems from the samurai, member of an isolationist Japan hostile to the arrival of Western technologies, further distancing the lightsaber from being a technological weapon. And unlike a blaster, well, all you have to do is pull a trigger, using a lightsaber requires a lifetime of training. This is highlighted by the failure of Grievous, who even armed with 4 blades is easily defeated by Obi-Wan. In a nutshell,
So uncivilized.
so this was for the theory. As for reality, we find out in the prequels that Jedi are based in Coruscant. Well, yeah, the Imperials aren't the only ones going down the wrong path by locking themselves in a fortress of technology. The Jedi Order is also going overboard with this gigantic temple in the middle of the megalopolis, in stark contrast to the green meadows of Naboo or the deserts of Tatooine. Among the many mistakes of the Order, one was to tear the Chosen One away from his sand planet and a sober way of life to put him into the ultra-urban environment of the capital planet. Their overconfidence in technology underlines their arrogance. While looking for Jango Fett, Obi-Wan faces the complacency of the Order.
If an item does not appear in our records, it does not exist.
He even goes so far as to call in analyst droids in this deleted scene, to no avail. In the end, the answer comes from a flesh and blood friend, a most original alien. When looking for Yoda, Luke is expecting the kind of Jedi from the prequels, but Yoda understood that one of the reasons for the fall of the Order had been to deny nature and switch to a simpler way of life. When reaching Dagobah, the young Jedi's thoughts betray his lack of consideration for the sobriety brought by nature.
I'm not picking up any cities or technology. It's really a strange place to find a Jedi Master.
His mind is full of legends, and he does the same mistake he did in the previous episode, not understanding that Ben Kenobi, the famed general, could be a simple hermit living in the canyons.
You know him? Well, of course I know him. He's me.
Yoda. You seek Yoda.
You know him?
Of course, Yoda plays on Luke, the same way I believe Lucas played on the Spectator with the character of Jar Jar Binks. Just like the Ewoks, they were famously attacked by fans, sometimes for good reason, but often disregarding how strong is the message they carry. They represent alterity, underdogs who don't meet the expectations at first sight, but prove to be the ones saving the day in the end. The theme of technology is not new to Lucas. His entire filmography questions the relationship between man and machine. His first movie, the dystopian sci-fi THX 1138, showed humans being persecuted by a robotic police force. Human bounds no longer exist in the society where orders are given by distorted, dehumanized voices through microphones and speakers. In his second film, American Graffiti, this process is repeated in another form. The young people are closer to the voice on the radio than to each other. And their relationship with the machine is conveyed by the car, which is metaphor for the character. Milner the Daredevil drives a dazzling hot rod, while Terry, who is mocked by everyone, doesn't even have a car in his own, and drives a small Vespa. Even Lucas's student films, including The Strange Anyone Lived in a Pretty Hard Town, draw this opposition between the industrial world and nature. Technology also bears the risk of decoupling oneself to nature, by creating a frontier with what composes our world. That's why the saga questions us about the possibility of a sober marriage between tech and nature, particularly in the environment. Geonosis and Camino, for example, illustrate that bipolarity. The Cloners planet confront high-tech complexes where it is all about control with the raging nature of the oceans. The Separatist planet, on the other hand, features termite mounds modeled on cathedrals, which is no coincidence since the designers drew the inspiration from the architecture of Gaudi, famous for its connection with nature. But those marvelous organic buildings stand next to the machine at its worst, the factory. The droid foundry looks like hell and had been designed on the basis of real production lines. Even the soundscape conveys this idea of unstoppable power, as sound effect designer Ben Bird has given it a cyclical, dull sound, almost equivalent to a heartbeat. This personification of the factory refers to a classic of silent cinema. Metropolis. In that movie, technology gave birth to an alienating and unstoppable factory. It also served as an important visual inspiration for Coruscant, with its aerial ways, the endless skyscrapers, and, above all, its bipolarity. The social classes do not intersect. Workers live in the depths of the city, recluded and exposed to the dangers of the machine. Ultimately, in Star Wars, nature reclaims its right over the techno factory. The Mustafar mining complexes are symbolically swallowed up by lava, showcasing the ephemeral nature of artificial constructions. Some of the visual allusions foster this dichotomy. Felucia, whose exotic flora stands in stark contrast to the war machines. Utapau as well. Invaded by droid armies, it is as if gangrenous with the technology. The Separatist command ships are like cancerous growths in the sinkholes that serve as homes for the persecuted natives.
But when we introduce the droids, and specifically Grievous's unicycle later on, you'll see that they tear apart at the world, that they're not part of this world, and that they don't coexist with this nature very well.
The noxious nature of technology was already evoked in Episode 5, with the world of Bespin, an apparently paradisiac planet that actually pumps from nature the gas it needs. Once again, the imagery of the demoniac factory is used. Smoke, mechanical clamps, even sound effects. The Carbonite can be linked to another classic movie, 2001: Space Odyssey. The film's message, which is open to interpretation, is to question the risks of technology, but also the divine, incomprehensible nature that technology could attain. The freezing chamber also refers to nature, as the set was built in the way of a web, with Vader as the spider in the center. I mean, look at this frame, Luke looks trapped. This motif of the perversion of nature by its artificial reconstruction is a recurring one. The Imperial windows and cockpits frequently have this spidery shape, as if Luke, powerless, was a fly trying to escape its grip. The web is also that of the galaxy, which Palpatine, at the center, controls like a puppeteer. His lightnings can even be interpreted as the physical manifestation of the strings he stretches to make others do his bidding. Maybe you think I'm contradicting myself with the baddies reproducing nature, but don't get me wrong, they distort nature for the technology, and that actually threatens environment. To put it simple, the Empire either negates nature or tries to reproduce it, irremediably perverting it. So what do we got? The AT-ATs are artificial horses, the probe droid looks like a jellyfish, the stormtroopers have the eyes of a bird of prey and the prognatic jaw of a gorilla, and the Empire has mouse and insectoid droids. The Trade Federation also tries to mimic nature, with disharmonious vulture droids, MTTs reminiscent of elephants, transports inspired by dragonflies, stabs from hummingbirds, and even the Separatist cruiser has its source in a whale.
There was a concept sketch that Joe Johnston had done. It looked a lot like a whale to me, kind of like a whale with baleen in its mouth. I didn't think it was particularly graceful, but it was really interesting. And so did a concept model of that was probably about 8 inches long. And then I started making one on my own that was more kind of in the direction that we went.
And once again, the world of insects is reproduced, with spider droids, droidocas reminiscent of beetles, the very insectoid look of Grievous, and his Magnagrods, who can still fight even beheaded, just as cockroaches that can survive without their heads for a week. Nature's very core is also invaded by technology. Life, giving birth, which is an event normally filled with humanity. Yet, it is a droid who delivers Padme. If machines give birth to the humans who created them, then the relationship has already been reversed. The question of life is also addressed with the Republic Army, made up of mass-produced clones that are ultimately quite similar to droids. Kamino's story arc follows a Greek myth, that of Prometheus, who enters Olympus, a hidden realm, to steal fire and give it to humans. This myth marks the birth of technology, since fire, though confiscated from man, will enable the forging of weapons and everything that follows. On Kamino, the knowledge Obi-Wan brings back to the Jedi is that of creating life. It is also dangerous and requires a wisdom that the Order lacks, which will be betrayed by its own army of clones. Finally, nature is also death, a fate rejected by the Sith, as they are up to attempt any machination to circumvent mortality. Yeah, they are not only cut off from nature by their use of technology, but also by their rejection of its simplest and most intransigent rule. Such is the case with the manipulation of the Force to keep Padme alive that Palpatine promises Anakin.
He could even keep the ones he cared about from dying.
But also with Palpatine's willingness to turn Vader into a tool. He could have left him for dead, and then the Chosen One would no longer have been a danger, but the temptation was too great to turn him into a weapon, thanks to technology. So he decides to operate on him and gives him his armor both to keep him alive and to control him. I mean, watch this look. Anakin is nothing short of pathetic as the killer of his armor encloses him. This scene borrows visuals from another 20th century classic, Frankenstein. The castle in the pouring rain, the lightnings, and, of course, the operating table, and Vader's hesitant steps as he leaves it. If Vader's the monster, Palpatine is the scientist who plays hazardously with nature, giving birth to a dangerous being. By the way, Vader is actually Palpatine's second try, since he had also created Grievous, a murderous cyborg whose coughing is made to evoke Vader's mechanical breathing. This flow traduces how unnatural is this creation. Anakin's transformation into Vader not only shows Palpatine's hubris and his rejection of nature, it is also a metaphor of Anakin's trajectory. His robotization actually begins way before he wears the armor, and displays the dehumanization caused by his fall to the dark side. Right from start, a certain irony surrounds the fact that Anakin creates a robot, 3PO, only to become one himself. The scene in the Foundry is very explicit on the thematic. Literally tossed around on conveyor belts, Anakin looks like a droid on an assembly line. He even gets his arms stuck in the metal, foreshadowing his transformation to come. Next, he loses his hand in his fight with Dooku, in the exact episode in which he commits his first acts on the dark side, and he ends up straining his own wife with that exact hand. Luke is also dismembered, but having refused to follow the dark side, his hand is replaced by a sensitive prosthesis, barely affecting his humanity.
I wanted very much to not have that hand that's put on him, to have it a dead thing. I wanted it to have feeling. I had them take a needle and stick it in the palm and on the fingers to have them twitch, which said to the audience, he has feeling in them. So it means he can make love, he can do things, he's a whole man again.
But Anakin inherits a completely robotic hand. Vader has already begun to haunt his body, as he's haunting his soul. It is then Luke's task to rid his father of the armor by bringing him back to the light side through compassion, which he does by forcing Vader to consider his humanity.
Search your feelings, Father. You can't do this. I feel the conflict within you. Let go of your hate.
This is achieved by the breakage of the armor that Luke slices both physically and spiritually. Vader is human again. Think of it that way. First time we saw Vader, he's just a cold machine who kills. In episode 5, we witness that a human being is inside the armor, which opens Vader to a whole new world of feelings that he'll express through his internal conflict. During the battle against his son, he starts with precise and controlled movements, almost like a machine, and he's obviously toying with Luke. He'll switch to 100% of his capacity only after being touched by Luke. His physical armor is hit, but on a metaphorical level, his spiritual shell is also broken, as he gives in to hatred. But only close to death will he remove his mask, having shown his humanity by saving his son. That way, Star Wars can again be compared to Metropolis, in which Wartrang, a mad scientist, has lost his hand in exchange for his machinations, which led him to kidnap a woman as he seeks to artificially recreate the one he loved. Well, all this is a great demonstration of technology is dangerous, but one thing causes a problem. That trash can.
R2-D2, Your Highness.
R2 is brave, courageous, capable of emotions, and none of him is human. He's all electronic. Maybe here's the key to Lucas's vision of technology. As devastating as the Death Star is, it is still only activated by a human. In other words, technology is capable of worth, as well as the best. The question then becomes, are machines slaves to the human, or can machines think by themselves?
Well, if droids could think, there'd be none of us here, would there?
Well, the problem is you're asking a stupid question. Of course, machines can't think as people do. A machine is different from a person. The interesting question is, just because something thinks differently from you, does that mean it's not thinking? No, we allow for humans to have such divergences from one another. You like strawberries, I hate ice skating. You cry at sad films, I am allergic to pollen. What is the point of different tastes, different preferences, if not to say that our brains work differently, that we think differently? And if we can say that about one another, then why can't we say the same thing for brains? built of copper and wire, steel.
We can indeed find an unexpected humanity in the droids. We said that R2 had human traits, but 3PO does as well. We can see him take care of the dead Jawas, an action supposedly highly spiritual. That is what critic Rob Iger argued, explaining that droids are doppelgangers of the human on screen and embody their emotions. For instance, watch how 3PO looks like he's convincing Chewie in the background, while Luke is doing so with Han. That humanity was tackled during episode 5 with that scene of Chewie in a reference to Hamlet, at the exception that he's not holding a human skull, but the one of our favorite droid. Anyway, in Star Wars, people don't seem to be ready yet to accept the droids, as we saw in the cantina.
Hey, we don't serve their kind here.
What?
Your droids. They'll have to wait outside. We don't want them here.
Why don't you wait out by the speeder? We don't want any trouble.
But when you want to think about potential humanity carried by a machine, there's of course one person that crossed our mind, so I'll let him conclude the video. As for us, I'll see you next month.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched C-beams glitter in the dark near the 10-Hauser gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain. Time to die.